store clerk refuses to sell medicine to a 9-year-old boy at 2 a.m. until he shows her a photo on his phone. When she sees the picture of his unconscious mother and the bruises on her face, she locks the store and immediately calls 911. The floorboards of the old Victorian house on Maple Street creaked their familiar warnings as Benjamin Fletcher pressed his ear against his bedroom door. At 9 years old, he had learned to read the house's moods as expertly as other children read picture books. Tonight, the silence downstairs felt different, heavier, like the air before a thunderstorm that made his chest feel tight and his stomach twist into knots. The digital clock on his nightstand glowed 11:47 p.m. in angry red numbers. Benjamin had been in bed for over an hour, but sleep remained as elusive as the warmth that had once filled this house before Derek moved in 2 years ago. His mother Jessica had tucked him in with her usual gentle kiss on his forehead, but he had noticed the way her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed his blanket, the way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Everything will be fine, sweetheart," she had whispered, her voice carrying that particular tone that Benjamin had learned meant the exact opposite. Derek just had a hard day at work. Sometimes adults need to talk through their problems. But Benjamin knew the difference between talking and what happened in the kitchen after bedtime. He had heard enough of Derek's conversations to understand that his mother's explanations were the kind of lies that adults told to protect children. Lies that made the truth even more frightening because it meant the grown-ups were scared too. A sudden crash from downstairs made Benjamin's heart leap into his throat. The sound of breaking glass was followed by Derek's voice, raised in anger that cut through the walls like a knife. "I'm sick of your excuses, Jessica. You think you're so much better than me with your fancy library job and your college degree." Benjamin's small hands clenched into fists as he heard his mother's voice, quiet and pleading. He couldn't make out her words, but the tone was one he recognized, the same voice she used when she was trying to calm him down after a nightmare. Except now she was the one who needed calming. The house had not always been a place of whispered apologies and broken promises. Benjamin could still remember fragments of life before Derek, Sunday mornings when his mother would make pancakes shaped like animals. Evenings when they would read together on the couch, her voice bringing storybook characters to life. Jessica Fletcher had been a different person then. Quick to laugh and full of dreams she would share with her son about their future adventures. Derek had arrived during Benjamin's second grade year, introduced as Mommy's friend, who would be staying for dinner. He had seemed nice enough at first, bringing Benjamin small gifts and helping with homework. But somewhere along the way, Derek had stopped being a visitor and had become the man who decided when the television was too loud, when dinner was too late, and when Benjamin was getting in the way of adult conversation. The transformation had been gradual, like watching a photograph fade in sunlight. Jessica's laughter became rarer, her smiles more forced. She started wearing long sleeves even in summer, and Benjamin noticed how she would check the time obsessively when they were out together, always worried about getting home before Derek finished work. "You're pathetic," Derek's voice carried clearly through the thin walls. "No wonder your husband left you. Who would want to come home to this mess?" Benjamin's breath caught in his throat. Derek knew exactly which words would hurt his mother the most. Benjamin's father had died in a car accident when Benjamin was 5, a loss that had left Jessica struggling to rebuild their lives. Derek's reference to Benjamin's father was a deliberate cruelty, designed to open old wounds that had never properly healed. The sound of footsteps moving rapidly across the kitchen floor was followed by Jessica's voice, higher now, tinged with fear. "Please, Derek, not so loud. You'll wake Benjamin." Even in her own fear, she was thinking of her son. Benjamin felt a surge of love for his mother so intense it made his chest ache. She was trying to protect him just as she always did, even when she could barely protect herself. "That kid needs to learn that the world doesn't revolve around him," Derek snarled. "He's too soft, just like you. A real man would have taught him some discipline by now." Benjamin knew that Derek's idea of discipline involved raised voices, harsh words, and the kind of punishments that left marks his mother would later explain away as accidents. He had learned to make himself invisible when Derek was in one of his moods, to retreat to his room and wait for the storm to pass. But tonight felt different. There was an edge to Derek's anger that Benjamin had never heard before, a a dangerous quality that made the hair on his arms stand up. He pressed his ear harder against the door, trying to catch every word, every nuance that might tell him how bad things were about to get. "I work 10 hours a day to keep a roof over your heads," Derek continued, his voice growing more agitated. "And what do I come home to? A house that's a mess, dinner that's cold, and a woman who can't even manage to keep her own kid in line." Benjamin's room was directly above the kitchen, and he could hear Derek's heavy boots pacing back and forth across the linoleum floor. The rhythm was irregular, aggressive, like a caged animal looking for something to attack. "I'm sorry," Jessica's voice was barely audible. "I can make you something else to eat. I can clean up. Just please, let's talk about this calmly." The sound that followed made Benjamin's blood freeze. It was the unmistakable noise of a hand hitting flesh, followed by Jessica's sharp intake of breath. Benjamin had heard that sound before, though his mother had always managed to hide the evidence by morning, covering bruises with makeup and explaining away her careful movements as the result of being clumsy. Benjamin's 9-year-old mind struggled to process what he was hearing. Part of him wanted to run downstairs, to throw himself between Derek and his mother, to demand that the man stop hurting the most important person in his world. But another part of him, the part that had learned to survive in this house, knew that his intervention would only make things worse. Derek had made it clear on several occasions that Benjamin was to stay in his room after bedtime, no matter what he heard. The consequences of disobedience had been made abundantly clear through Derek's system of punishments that always stopped just short of leaving visible marks. Benjamin had learned to comply, to be the invisible child who caused no trouble and drew no attention. "Look what you made me do." Derek's voice carried a tone of false regret that Benjamin had learned to recognize. "If you would just listen to me, if you would just try to be a better partner, I wouldn't have to get so frustrated." It was Derek's standard pattern: violence followed by blame, anger followed by twisted logic that somehow made everything Jessica's fault. Benjamin had heard this script so many times that he could predict the words before they were spoken. "I don't want to hurt you," Derek continued, his voice now taking on the sickeningly sweet tone he used when he was trying to manipulate. "You know I love you, but you have to understand that I have needs, that I deserve respect in my own home." Benjamin's hands pressed against his ears, trying to block out the sound of Derek's voice. He hated how the man could shift from monster to victim in the space of a few sentences, how he could make his mother believe that she was the problem, that she was the one who needed to change. The house fell silent for several minutes, and Benjamin allowed himself to hope that maybe the worst was over. Maybe Derek would storm out, as he sometimes did, leaving Jessica to clean up the pieces of whatever had been broken. Maybe tomorrow would bring another round of Derek's apologies, flowers, and promises that things would be different. But then Benjamin heard something that made his blood run cold. The sound of Derek's voice dropping to a whisper, the tone he used when he was at his most dangerous. "You know what your problem is, Jessica? You don't appreciate what you have. You don't appreciate me." The silence that followed was filled with an electric tension that Benjamin could feel through the walls. He knew his mother was calculating, trying to find the right words that would defuse the situation without triggering Derek's rage. "I do appreciate you." Jessica's voice was carefully controlled. "I appreciate everything you do for us. I'm grateful that you're here." Benjamin's heart broke a little more at the sound of his mother's forced gratitude. She was a woman who had once been fiercely independent, who had raised him alone for years, who had built a life for them through sheer determination and love. Now she was reduced to thanking the man who terrorized them both. "Grateful." Derek's voice rose again. "Grateful isn't enough. I need to know that you understand who's in charge here. I need to know that you respect me." The sound of furniture scraping across the floor suggested that Derek was moving closer to Jessica. Benjamin's entire body tensed as he imagined his mother backing away, looking for an escape route that didn't exist. "I do respect you," Jessica said quickly. "Of course I respect you. Then prove it." Derek's voice was cold now, devoid of any human warmth. "Get on your knees and prove it." Benjamin didn't understand the full implications of Derek's demand, but he understood enough to know that his mother was in serious danger. The tone of Derek's voice suggested that this was not a request but a command, and Benjamin had learned that Derek's commands were always backed by the threat of violence. The sound of Jessica's quiet sobbing drifted through the walls, and Benjamin felt something inside him break. His mother, the woman who had read him bedtime stories, who had kissed away his scraped knees, who had worked 2 jobs to buy him the bicycle he wanted for his birthday, was crying because of the monster who had invaded their home. "Please!" Jessica's voice was barely a whisper. "Not tonight. I'm so tired, and I have to work early tomorrow." The sound of Derek's harsh laughter filled the house. "You think you get to decide when you're too tired? You think you get to make demands in my house? It's not your house," Jessica said, her voice stronger now, as if she had found some reserve of courage. "This is my house. I pay the mortgage. I pay the bills." The silence that followed was more terrifying than any of Derek's shouting. Benjamin knew that his mother had crossed a line, had challenged Derek's authority in a way that the man would never tolerate. When Derek finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried more menace than any scream. "Your house? Your bills? Everything you have is because I allow it. Everything you are is because I choose to be with you. And if you ever forget that again, I'll make sure you remember it." The sound of Derek's footsteps moving rapidly across the kitchen was followed by a crash that shook the entire house. Benjamin pressed his face against the door, tears streaming down his cheeks as he listened to his mother's frightened cries. "Derek, please. You're scaring me." "Good." Derek's voice was filled with satisfaction. "Maybe now you'll remember who you're talking to." The sounds that followed painted a picture in Benjamin's mind that he would never be able to forget. The crash of dishes hitting the floor, the sound of his mother's voice pleading for Derek to stop, the heavy thud of something, or someone, hitting the wall. Benjamin's small body trembled as he realized that Derek had crossed a line tonight, that the violence had escalated beyond the careful boundaries that had existed before. His mother was in real danger, and there was nothing he could do to help her. The house fell silent again, but this time the silence was different. It was the silence of aftermath, of damage done and consequences yet to be faced. Benjamin strained to hear any sound that would tell him his mother was okay, but the only noise was the distant hum of the refrigerator and the sound of his own rapid breathing. After what felt like hours, Benjamin heard Derek's heavy footsteps moving toward the front of the house. The sound of keys jingling was followed by the slam of the front door and the roar of Derek's truck engine starting up. Benjamin waited until the sound of the truck had faded into the distance before he dared to open his bedroom door. The hallway was dark, lit only by the pale glow of the streetlight filtering through the window at the end of the hall. He crept down the stairs, his bare feet silent on the cold hardwood, his heart pounding so hard he was sure it would wake the neighbors. The kitchen was a disaster zone. Broken dishes littered the floor, and the table had been overturned, its contents scattered across the room. But Benjamin's attention was focused on the still form lying near the refrigerator, illuminated by the harsh fluorescent light that Derek had left on. Jessica Fletcher lay motionless on the kitchen floor, her face turned away from Benjamin, her dark hair spread across the linoleum like spilled ink. Her body was positioned at an unnatural angle, as if she had fallen and been unable to get up. Benjamin approached slowly, his young mind trying to process what he was seeing. His mother's face was turned toward the wall, but he could see the dark bruises that covered her arms, the way her breathing was shallow and irregular. "Mom," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Mom, can you hear me?" Jessica didn't respond. Her eyes were closed, and there was a stillness about her that terrified Benjamin more than all of Derek's shouting. He had seen his mother tired before, had seen her upset and worried, but he had never seen her like this, so still, so vulnerable, so broken. Benjamin knelt beside his mother, his small hands hovering over her body as he tried to decide what to do. He had learned basic first aid in school, but this was beyond anything they had covered in their safety lessons. All he knew was that his mother was hurt, that she needed help, and that Derek had threatened terrible consequences if Benjamin ever called the police. But Derek was gone now, and Benjamin was alone with his unconscious mother in a house that felt more like a crime scene than a home. The silence stretched out around them, broken only by the sound of Jessica's labored breathing and the tick of the kitchen clock marking the passage of time. Benjamin's 9-year-old mind began to work through the problem with the methodical approach his mother had taught him for handling difficult situations. First, he needed to make sure she was still breathing. She was, though it seemed shallow and uneven. Second, he needed to figure out why she wouldn't wake up. The bruises on her face suggested that Derek had hit her harder than ever before. Third, and most importantly, he needed to help her get better. In Benjamin's understanding of the world, people who were hurt needed medicine. When he had the flu, his mother gave him medicine that made him feel better. When he fell off his bike and scraped his knee, she cleaned the wound and applied medicine that helped it heal. The logic was simple in his 9-year-old mind. His mother was hurt, so she needed medicine. And the only place to get medicine at this time of night was the 24-hour pharmacy that his mother had taken him to before when he was sick. Benjamin stood up, his decision made. He would go to the pharmacy, buy medicine for his mother's bruises and her headache, and help her feel better. It was what any good son would do, and Benjamin had learned to be very good at taking care of his mother. He moved through the house with purpose now, gathering the things he would need. His mother's purse was on the counter, knocked over but still containing her wallet. Benjamin took out $40, enough to buy medicine and maybe some of the pain relievers he had seen advertised on television. His winter coat was hanging in the closet by the front door, and his boots were lined up neatly underneath. Benjamin dressed quickly, his movements efficient despite the way his hands shook. He grabbed his phone, a simple device his mother had given him for emergencies, and slipped it into his pocket. Before leaving, Benjamin returned to the kitchen to check on his mother one more time. She was still breathing, still unconscious, but she seemed stable. He found a pillow from the living room couch and gently placed it under her head, then covered her with a blanket from the hall closet. "I'm going to get you medicine, Mom," he whispered, his voice steady despite the tears that threatened to fall. "I'm going to make you feel better." Benjamin Fletcher, 9 years old and carrying the weight of his mother's life in his small hands, stepped out into the frigid February night. The snow crunched under his boots as he began the 12-block journey to Murphy's pharmacy, his breath forming small clouds in the frozen air. The streetlights cast long shadows across the empty streets of Millbrook, and Benjamin pulled his coat tighter around his body as he walked. He had never been out this late by himself, had never walked so far in the dark, but the thought of his mother lying alone on the kitchen floor gave him the courage to keep moving. The digital clock on the bank building showed 2:03 a.m. as Benjamin approached the glowing sign of Murphy's 24-hour pharmacy. The building stood like a beacon in the darkness, its windows bright with fluorescent light that promised help and healing. Benjamin took a deep breath, squared his small shoulders, and pushed through the heavy glass doors. He was about to meet Carmen Rodriguez, though he didn't know her name yet. He was about to set in motion a chain of events that would change everything. But all Benjamin knew in that moment was that his mother needed medicine, and he was going to make sure she got it. He was going to be the hero his mother deserved, even if he didn't understand yet what that would truly mean. The fluorescent lights of Murphy's 24-hour pharmacy hummed overhead like electronic insects, casting everything in a harsh, clinical white that made Benjamin's pale face appear almost ghostly. The warmth of the building was a sharp contrast to the bitter February cold outside, and Benjamin could feel his cheeks beginning to tingle as circulation returned to his frozen skin. Behind the pharmacy counter stood Carmen Rodriguez, a woman whose 43 years had been marked by both struggle and resilience. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her brown eyes held the kind of watchful intelligence that came from years of working night shifts and observing human nature at its most vulnerable hours. She wore the standard Murphy's Pharmacy vest over a simple sweater, and her name tag identified her as Carmen Night Supervisor. Carmen had been working at Murphy's for 7 years, ever since her divorce from her abusive ex-husband had left her needing steady employment with flexible hours. The night shift paid better than day work, and it allowed her to be home during the day with her teenage daughter Sophia. It was honest work that helped her rebuild her life one paycheck at a time, though the late hours often brought encounters with people whose stories reminded her of chapters from her own past she would rather forget. When the electronic chime announced Benjamin's arrival, Carmen looked up from the inventory sheets she had been reviewing. Her first reaction was surprise. Children did not typically visit pharmacies at 2 in the morning. Her second reaction was concern. As her trained eye took in the details that told a story no child should have to live. Benjamin's winter coat was expensive but too large for his small frame, suggesting it was a hand-me-down or purchased with growth in mind by a parent who could not afford to replace clothes frequently. His jeans were clean but showed signs of careful mending at the knees. His sneakers were appropriate for the season but bore the scuff marks of a child who walked everywhere rather than being driven. Most telling of all were his eyes, large, dark, and holding a gravity that belonged to someone much older. "Excuse me," Benjamin said, his voice barely above a whisper as he approached the counter. His hands were still trembling slightly from the cold, and he shoved them deep into his coat pockets to hide their shaking. "I need to buy some medicine for my mom." Carmen set down her pen and leaned forward slightly, her maternal instincts immediately activated by the sight of this young boy alone at such an unusual hour. "What kind of medicine does your mother need, sweetheart?" Benjamin's mind raced as he tried to remember the names of medicines he had seen in their bathroom cabinet. "Something for headaches," he said carefully, "and maybe something for bruises. She fell down and hurt herself, and she has a really bad headache." The explanation sounded reasonable to Benjamin's 9-year-old logic, but Carmen's years of experience working with the public had taught her to listen for what people weren't saying as much as what they were. The story was too neat, too carefully constructed for a child who should have been panicked about his mother's condition. "Where is your mother now?" Carmen asked gently, her voice taking on the tone she used with her own daughter when she suspected there was more to a story than the initial telling revealed. "She's at home," Benjamin replied, his eyes not quite meeting Carmen's gaze. "She's sleeping, but I know she's going to have a really bad headache when she wakes up. I want to have the medicine ready for her." Carmen studied the boy's face, noting the way he avoided eye contact and the careful way he chose his words. In her experience, children who had learned to be this articulate about adult problems were usually children who had been forced to grow up too quickly. "How did you get here?" Carmen asked. "Did someone drive you?" "I walked," Benjamin said, his chin lifting slightly with pride at his accomplishment. "It's only 12 blocks. I know the way because Mom and I come here sometimes when I'm sick." 12 blocks in the middle of a February night was no small journey for a 9-year-old child. Carmen felt her concern deepening as she tried to imagine what circumstances would drive a young boy to make such a trek alone. "Benjamin," she said, reading his name from the prescription history that had appeared on her screen. "I remember you and your mother. She's always very careful to make sure you're taking your medicine properly when you're sick." Benjamin's face brightened slightly at the recognition. His mother had indeed brought him to this pharmacy several times over the past 2 years, and Carmen had always been kind to them. Jessica Fletcher was a customer who stood out in Carmen's memory. A gentle woman who always seemed slightly nervous, who paid in cash, and who treated her son with the kind of protective tenderness that suggested they were very much a team facing the world together. "That's right," Benjamin said, his voice gaining confidence. "Mom always takes really good care of me when I'm sick. Now I want to take care of her." The sentiment was touching, but it did nothing to alleviate Carmen's growing concern about the situation. She had worked enough night shifts to recognize the signs of domestic trouble, and everything about this scenario was raising red flags in her mind. "What kind of medicine were you thinking about?" Carmen asked, moving from behind the counter to crouch down to Benjamin's eye level. The change in position was deliberate. She had learned that children were more likely to tell the truth when they felt they were talking to an equal rather than being interrogated by an authority figure. Benjamin pulled his hands from his pockets, revealing the crumpled $40 bills he had taken from his mother's purse. "I have money," he said, holding out the bills as if they were proof of his legitimacy as a customer. "I can pay for whatever she needs." Carmen gently pushed his hands back toward his body. "Keep your money safe for now. Let's talk about what's wrong with your mother first. You said she fell down?" "Yes," Benjamin said quickly, his rehearsed explanation ready. "She was in the kitchen, and she fell down and hit her head. Now she won't wake up, but I think if I get her some medicine for her headache, she'll feel better." The words tumbled out in a rush, and Carmen felt her heart sink as she processed what Benjamin had actually said. A woman who wouldn't wake up after hitting her head was not someone who needed over-the-counter pain medication. She was someone who needed immediate medical attention. Benjamin, Carmen said carefully, when you say your mother won't wake up, what exactly do you mean? Benjamin's face scrunched up as he tried to find the right words to explain something that was beyond his understanding. She's lying on the kitchen floor, and her eyes are closed, and when I talk to her, she doesn't answer. But she's still breathing, so I know she's okay. She just needs medicine to make her headache go away. Carmen felt a chill that had nothing to do with the February weather outside. A woman lying unconscious on a kitchen floor with a head injury was in serious medical distress, not something that could be treated with aspirin and good intentions. How long has your mother been like this? Carmen asked, trying to keep her voice calm and non-threatening. Benjamin looked at the large clock on the pharmacy wall, his young mind struggling with the concept of time in crisis. Since Derek left, he said, not realizing that he had just provided Carmen with a crucial piece of information. Who is Derek? Carmen asked, though she was beginning to suspect she already knew the answer. He's Mom's boyfriend, Benjamin said, his voice dropping to a whisper. He was really mad tonight because dinner was cold when he got home from work. They were talking really loud, and then I heard things breaking, and then Derek left in his truck. Carmen's suspicions were rapidly crystallizing into certainty. She had lived this story herself, had been the woman lying unconscious while her young daughter wondered why Mommy wouldn't wake up. The pattern was as familiar to her as her own reflection. An abusive partner, escalating violence, and a child left to cope with the aftermath. Benjamin, Carmen said gently, I think your mother might need more help than medicine from the pharmacy can provide. When someone hits their head hard enough that they won't wake up, they usually need to see a doctor. Benjamin's eyes widened with fear at the suggestion. No, he said quickly. No doctors. Derek said if we ever call doctors or police or anyone like that, something really bad would happen. I just need medicine. Please, can you just sell me some medicine? The desperation in Benjamin's voice broke Carmen's heart. She recognized the fear that Derek had instilled in this family, the isolation and threats that kept victims from seeking help even when their lives were in danger. Derek doesn't have to know, Carmen said softly. Sometimes grown-ups say things when they're angry that they don't really mean. I think Derek would want your mother to get better, don't you? But Benjamin was already shaking his head, his young face set with determination. You don't understand. Derek meant it. He always means it. I just need medicine for Mom's headache. That's all. Please. Carmen found herself in an impossible position. Every instinct she possessed told her that Benjamin's mother needed immediate medical attention, but she also understood the terror that Derek's threats had instilled in this child. Pushing too hard might cause Benjamin to flee, leaving his mother without any help at all. Okay, Carmen said, making a decision. Let me see what I can do. But first, I need to understand exactly what's wrong with your mother. Can you tell me more about how she's hurt? Benjamin's relief was visible as he thought Carmen was finally going to help him in the way he had hoped. She has bruises on her face, he said matter-of-factly, and on her arms. And she hit her head when she fell down, so it probably hurts really bad. How do you know she has bruises if she won't wake up? Carmen asked gently. Because I can see them, Benjamin said simply. They're dark and purple, like the ones she gets sometimes when she's clumsy. Carmen bit back her response to Benjamin's innocent explanation for his mother's recurring bruises. She had used similar explanations once upon a time, had trained her own daughter to accept them as normal because the truth was too dangerous to acknowledge. Benjamin, Carmen said, I want to help you and your mother, but I need to make sure I understand the situation completely. Can you show me a picture of your mother? I want to see how badly she's hurt so I can recommend the right medicine. Benjamin's hand moved instinctively to his phone in his pocket. His mother had taught him to take pictures of important things, and in his childlike logic, his mother's condition certainly qualified as important. I took a picture, he said slowly, so I could remember what she looked like when I got to the pharmacy, so I could tell you exactly what was wrong. Carmen's pulse quickened. If Benjamin had photographed his mother's condition, that picture would tell her everything she needed to know about the severity of the situation. That was very smart thinking, Carmen encouraged. Can you show me the picture? Benjamin hesitated for a moment, some instinct warning him that showing the picture might change things in ways he wasn't prepared for. But his desperate need to help his mother overcame his caution. He pulled out his phone with hands that were still trembling slightly, scrolling through his photos until he found the image he had taken just before leaving the house. His face was solemn as he held the phone out to Carmen. "This is what she looks like right now," he said quietly. "She needs medicine to make the bruises go away and to make her headache stop." Carmen took the phone from Benjamin's small hands, steeling herself for what she was about to see. But nothing could have prepared her for the brutal reality captured in the photograph. Jessica Fletcher lay unconscious on her kitchen floor, her face turned toward the camera in a way that revealed the full extent of her injuries. Dark bruises covered her cheek and forehead, and her left eye was swollen completely shut. Her lip was split and bloody, and there were fingerprint-shaped bruises on her throat that suggested she had been choked. Her arms, visible where her sleeves had ridden up, showed older bruises in various stages of healing, creating a timeline of abuse that extended far beyond tonight's violence. But what made Carmen's blood run cold was not just the visible injuries. It was the unnatural stillness of Jessica's body, the way her arm was positioned at an odd angle, the pale color of her skin that suggested she was in serious medical distress. Carmen had seen domestic violence up close, had lived with its daily reality for years before finding the courage to escape. But the level of brutality captured in Benjamin's photograph was beyond anything she had experienced personally. This was not just abuse, this was attempted murder. "Oh my God," Carmen whispered, the words escaping before she could stop them. Benjamin's face immediately filled with worry. "Is it really bad?" he asked anxiously. "I know it looks scary, but medicine can fix bruises, right? I've seen commercials on TV that say medicine can help with pain and swelling." Carmen's hands shook as she looked from the photograph to Benjamin's hopeful face. This innocent child had no understanding of what he was showing her, no comprehension that his mother was not sleeping but unconscious from what appeared to be a severe head injury and possible internal trauma. "Benjamin," Carmen said, her voice thick with emotion, "your mother is very, very sick. Much sicker than medicine from the pharmacy can help with. But the medicine will help a little bit, right?" Benjamin pressed, his need to believe in a simple solution evident in every word. "Even if it doesn't fix everything, it will make her feel better when she wakes up?" Carmen felt tears threatening as she looked at this brave little boy who had walked 12 blocks in the freezing cold because he believed he could save his mother with determination and $40. She thought of her own daughter, of the night Sophia had tried to take care of Carmen after particularly brutal encounters with her father. "Sweetheart," Carmen said gently, "I need to make a phone call. Your mother needs help from people who know how to take care of injuries like hers." Benjamin's face immediately filled with panic. "No, you can't call anyone," Derek said. "Derek isn't here," Carmen interrupted, her voice firm but kind. "And Derek doesn't get to decide whether your mother lives or dies." The stark words hung in the air between them, and Benjamin's young mind struggled to process their implication. "Lives or dies," he repeated, his voice barely a whisper. Carmen knelt down again, taking Benjamin's cold hands in her warm ones. "Your mother is very badly hurt, Benjamin. If we don't get her help right now, tonight, she might not wake up at all." Benjamin's face crumpled as the reality of the situation finally penetrated his childlike hope for a simple solution. "But Derek said if we ever called for help, he would make things much worse for us." "Derek has already made things as bad as they can get," Carmen said quietly. "The only way they can get better is if we get your mother the help she needs." Benjamin looked down at his phone, still displaying the image of his unconscious mother. For the first time since finding her on the kitchen floor, he allowed himself to truly see what the photograph revealed. Not just a woman with bruises who needed medicine, but a human being who had been beaten nearly to death. "Will the doctors be able to help her?" he asked, his voice small and frightened. "I think so," Carmen said honestly, "but only if we call them right now." Benjamin stood silent for a long moment, weighing Derek's threats against his mother's motionless form in the photograph. Finally, he looked up at Carmen with eyes that held a resolution far beyond his 9 years. "Okay," he whispered. "Call them." Carmen moved quickly to the pharmacy phone, her fingers dialing 911 with practiced efficiency. As she waited for the dispatcher to answer, she looked back at Benjamin, who stood clutching his phone like a lifeline. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher's voice was calm and professional. "I need police and paramedics immediately," Carmen said, her voice steady despite the emotion churning inside her. "I have a 9-year-old child here whose mother appears to be unconscious from domestic violence. The injuries look severe, and the child walked here alone to try to get medicine for her." As Carmen provided the dispatcher with the Fletcher family's address, Benjamin moved to stand beside her, no longer the child who had walked into the pharmacy hoping to buy a simple solution to an impossible problem. In the space of a few minutes, he had been forced to confront the reality that his mother's life hung in the balance, and that sometimes being brave meant accepting help even when it terrified you. The fluorescent lights continued to hum overhead as Carmen finished her call and turned to face Benjamin. Outside, the February wind howled around the building, but inside the warm pharmacy, a child and a woman who understood his pain stood together, waiting for help to arrive. "They're coming," Carmen said softly. "The police and paramedics are going to your house right now to help your mother." Benjamin nodded, his face pale but determined. "Will you come with me?" he asked quietly. "I don't want to be alone when they get there." Carmen didn't hesitate. "Of course," she said, already reaching for her coat. "We'll go together." As they prepared to leave the pharmacy, Carmen locked the front door and flipped the sign to "Closed for emergency." She had made her choice, the same choice she wished someone had made for her all those years ago when she was the one lying unconscious while her young daughter tried to understand why mommy wouldn't wake up. Benjamin Fletcher had walked into Murphy's pharmacy as a child trying to save his mother with medicine and hope. He was leaving as a young person who had learned that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is ask for help, even when everything inside you is screaming that it's too dangerous to try. The journey back to Maple Street would be the longest 12 blocks of Benjamin's life, but he would not walk them alone. Carmen Rodriguez, who understood the weight of fear and the courage required to break free from it, would be beside him every step of the way. As they stepped out into the bitter February night, the distant sound of sirens could already be heard approaching from the direction of downtown Millbrook. Help was coming, and for the first time since finding his mother on the kitchen floor, Benjamin allowed himself to believe that everything might actually be okay. The walk back to Maple Street felt both endless and impossibly short, each step carrying Benjamin Fletcher closer to a future he couldn't yet imagine. His small legs struggled to keep pace with Carmen Rodriguez's determined stride through the February night, but she adjusted her speed without making him feel like he was slowing her down. The sound of sirens grew louder with each passing block, their urgent wailing cutting through the frigid air like a promise of salvation that Benjamin wasn't sure he was ready to receive. Carmen kept one protective hand on Benjamin's shoulder as they navigated the icy sidewalks, her mind racing through the implications of what she had seen in that devastating photograph. In her 7 years working night shifts at Murphy's pharmacy, she had encountered her share of desperate people seeking help in unconventional ways, addicts looking for easy access to prescription drugs, elderly customers confused about their medications, parents frantic about their children's sudden illnesses. But nothing in her experience had prepared her for the brutal reality captured in Benjamin's innocent documentation of his mother's condition. The image was seared into Carmen's memory with photographic clarity. Jessica Fletcher's unconscious form lying on her kitchen floor, her face a canvas of violence painted in shades of purple and black. The swollen eye, the split lip, the fingerprint bruises on her throat that spoke of strangulation. These were not the injuries of someone who had simply fallen down, as Derek's conditioning had taught Benjamin to believe. These were the calculated marks of a man who had beaten a woman nearly to death and then walked away, leaving her 9-year-old son to find her and try to comprehend the incomprehensible. "Are you okay?" Carmen asked as they paused at a street corner, waiting for the light to change. Benjamin's face was pale in the harsh glare of the streetlight, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air that dissipated quickly in the wind. "I think so," Benjamin replied, though his voice carried the tremor of someone trying to be braver than they felt. His hands were shoved deep in his coat pockets, still clutching the $40 he had planned to spend on medicine that would magically fix everything wrong in his world. "I keep thinking about what you said, about Mom maybe not waking up at all. Do you really think the doctors can help her?" Carmen squeezed his shoulder gently, feeling the fragile bones beneath his winter coat. "I've seen people recover from injuries that looked impossible to survive," she said honestly, drawing on her years of watching human resilience triumph over seemingly insurmountable odds. "The most important thing is that we're getting her help now, tonight, instead of waiting until morning." Benjamin nodded, processing this information with the solemn consideration that had become his default response to adult crises. In his 9 years of life, he had been forced to develop a maturity that should have taken decades to acquire, learning to read the subtle signs of impending violence and to navigate the complex emotional landscape of a household ruled by fear. "Derek always said that doctors and police just make things worse for families like ours," Benjamin said quietly, his voice barely audible above the wind. "He said they break up families and put people in jail for no reason. He said they take children away from their mothers and put them with strangers who don't love them." Carmen felt her heart clench at the systematic way Derek had isolated the Fletcher family from potential sources of help. It was a classic pattern of abuse, convinced the victims that the outside world was hostile and dangerous, that seeking help would only bring more pain and separation. She remembered her own ex-husband using similar tactics, painting law enforcement and social services as enemies who would destroy their family if given the chance. "Derek told you a lot of things that weren't true," Carmen replied, her voice carrying the weight of her own experience with manipulative partners. "People who hurt others often try to convince their victims that getting help is dangerous, because they know that help means they'll have to stop hurting people." The concept was complex for a 9-year-old mind to grasp fully, but Benjamin's intelligence and forced maturity allowed him to understand the basic principle. "So Derek was lying to keep us scared?" "Derek was lying to keep you and your mother under his control," Carmen confirmed, her voice growing firmer as they continued walking. "Fear is a powerful tool, especially when someone uses it against people they're supposed to love and protect. Derek knew that if you and your mother weren't afraid of getting help, you might realize that you deserved better than what he was giving you." As they turned onto Maple Street, the flashing red and blue lights of emergency vehicles came into view, their strobing illumination transforming the quiet residential street into a scene that looked like something from a television crime drama. 2 police cars, an ambulance, and a fire truck were parked outside the Fletcher house, their presence announcing to the entire neighborhood that something serious had occurred at 1247 Maple Street. Benjamin stopped walking abruptly, his small body freezing as the reality of the situation hit him with full force. "There are so many cars," he whispered, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and terror. "I didn't know they would send so many people." Carmen knelt down beside him on the cold sidewalk, her face level with his as she spoke. "I know it looks scary, but every one of those vehicles is here to help your mother. The paramedics are trained to take care of people who are badly hurt, and the police are here to make sure Derek can't hurt either of you again." Benjamin's eyes darted from vehicle to vehicle, taking in the organized chaos of an emergency response. Paramedics were moving equipment from the ambulance to the front door of his house, their movements efficient and purposeful despite the late hour. Police officers stood near their vehicles, speaking into radios and coordinating their response with the calm professionalism of people who dealt with domestic violence cases far too regularly. "What if Derek comes back while they're here?" Benjamin asked, the question that had been haunting him since they left the pharmacy. "What if he gets angry about all the police cars and decides to hurt Mom even worse? Then the police will arrest him," Carmen said simply, her voice carrying a confidence that Benjamin desperately needed to hear. "Derek's time of scaring you and your mother is over. He might not know that yet, but it's true." They approached the house slowly, Benjamin's eyes taking in details that painted a picture of organized emergency response. The front door stood open, spilling warm light onto the frozen lawn where patches of snow reflected the flashing emergency lights. He could see figures moving inside his house, strangers in uniforms who were documenting the crime scene that had been his kitchen just a few hours earlier. A female police officer noticed Carmen and Benjamin approaching and walked over to meet them, her breath visible in the cold air as she spoke. Officer Janet Walsh was a 15-year veteran of the Millbrook Police Department, her experience with domestic violence cases evident in the gentle but professional way she addressed Benjamin. "Are you Benjamin Fletcher?" Officer Walsh asked, crouching down to his eye level in the same way Carmen had done at the pharmacy. "Yes, ma'am," Benjamin replied, his voice barely audible. The formal politeness that his mother had taught him remained intact despite everything that had happened. "I'm Officer Walsh. You did exactly the right thing by getting help for your mother tonight. That took a lot of courage." Benjamin looked uncertain about whether his actions qualified as courageous. In his mind, he had simply done what any son would do, try to help his mother when she was hurt. "I just wanted to get her medicine to make her feel better." "Sometimes getting help is the best medicine," Officer Walsh said kindly, her years of experience allowing her to communicate with traumatized children in ways that felt safe and non-threatening. "The paramedics are with your mother right now, and they're very good at helping people who are hurt." Carmen introduced herself and explained her role in Benjamin's decision to call for help, describing the sequence of events that had led them from the pharmacy back to Maple Street. Officer Walsh listened carefully, taking notes and asking clarifying questions about the timeline of events and Benjamin's state of mind throughout the ordeal. "We'll need to take a formal statement from Benjamin," Officer Walsh explained to Carmen. "But first we want to make sure his mother is stable and on her way to the hospital. Children shouldn't have to watch their parents being loaded into ambulances if we can avoid it." As if summoned by her words, the front door of the Fletcher house opened and paramedics emerged carrying a stretcher. Jessica Fletcher was strapped securely to the gurney, her face covered by an oxygen mask and her body connected to various monitoring devices that beeped and hummed with electronic life. Even from a distance, Benjamin could see that his mother looked smaller and more fragile than the confident woman who had tucked him into bed just hours earlier, reading him a chapter from the book they had been enjoying together. The sight of his mother's motionless form on the stretcher hit Benjamin like a physical blow. Until this moment, part of him had held on to the hope that maybe the situation wasn't as serious as the adults were making it seem, that maybe his mother would wake up on her own and everything would return to normal. But seeing her connected to medical equipment, surrounded by paramedics who were working with urgent efficiency, made the gravity of her condition undeniably real. "Mom!" Benjamin called out, starting to run toward the stretcher before Carmen caught his arm gently but firmly. "Let the paramedics work," she said gently, her voice filled with understanding for his desperate need to be close to his mother. "They need to get her to the hospital quickly, so the doctors can help her." Benjamin watched helplessly as the stretcher was loaded into the ambulance, his mother's still form disappearing behind the vehicle's closed doors. One of the paramedics, a young woman with kind eyes, approached Benjamin before they departed. "Are you Jessica's son?" she asked, her voice warm despite the urgency of the situation. "Yes," Benjamin replied, his voice small and frightened. "Your mom is strong, and we're going to take very good care of her," the paramedic said, crouching down to Benjamin's level. "She's breathing on her own, which is a very good sign. The doctors at the hospital are going to do everything they can to help her get better." The paramedic's words provided Benjamin with the first ray of hope he had felt since finding his mother on the kitchen floor. "Can I go with her to the hospital?" "The hospital can be a scary place for children, especially at night," the paramedic explained gently. "But I promise you that the doctors will take excellent care of your mother, and someone will make sure you get updates about how she's doing." The ambulance pulled away from the curb with its sirens wailing, carrying Jessica Fletcher toward whatever hope existed for her recovery. Benjamin stood on the frozen sidewalk, watching the red and white lights disappear into the distance, taking his mother and his old life with them. Officer Walsh approached Benjamin and Carmen again, her expression serious but kind. "Benjamin, we need to talk about what happened tonight. Can you tell me about the last time you saw Derek?" Benjamin's account was halting and filled with the gaps that a child's perspective inevitably created, but Officer Walsh was skilled at asking the right questions to fill in the missing pieces. She guided him through the sequence of events with patience and gentleness, never pushing him to remember details that were too painful or traumatic to revisit. Derek left in his truck after he hurt Mom, Benjamin concluded, his hands still shoved deep in his coat pockets. I waited until I couldn't hear the engine anymore, and then I went downstairs to check on her. That's when I found her on the kitchen floor. That was very smart, Officer Walsh said, making notes on her pad. Waiting until you were sure he was gone kept you safe. Can you tell me what Derek's truck looks like? Benjamin described Derek's vehicle in the detailed way that children notice cars, a black pickup truck with a dent in the left rear bumper, and a crack in the windshield that Derek had been meaning to fix for months. Officer Walsh radioed the description to other units, initiating a search for Derek that would extend throughout the county. Will Derek be arrested when he comes back? Benjamin asked, the question carrying both hope and fear. Part of him desperately wanted Derek to face consequences for what he had done, but another part of him was terrified of Derek's reaction to being challenged. We're going to do everything we can to make sure Derek can't hurt you or your mother again, Officer Walsh promised. But right now, our main concern is making sure you're safe and that your mother gets the medical care she needs. A detective had arrived on the scene and was coordinating with the crime scene technicians who were documenting the evidence inside the Fletcher house. Detective Michael Torres was a 20-year veteran who specialized in domestic violence cases, his experience evident in the methodical way he approached the investigation. The scene inside tells a clear story, Detective Torres explained to Officer Walsh as Benjamin listened with growing understanding. There are signs of a significant struggle in the kitchen. Overturned furniture, broken dishes, blood spatter patterns that suggest multiple impacts. We're photographing everything and collecting samples that will be crucial for prosecution. The overturned table, broken dishes, and blood stains on the kitchen floor would all become part of the case against Derek, tangible proof of the violence that Benjamin had tried to fix with $40 and a child's determination. The house that had been his home was now a crime scene, every room contaminated by evidence of the brutality that had driven him into the February night. Benjamin, Officer Walsh said, turning her attention back to the young boy who stood shivering despite his winter coat. We need to figure out where you're going to stay tonight. Do you have any relatives in town? Grandparents, aunts, or uncles who could take care of you while your mother is in the hospital? Benjamin shook his head slowly, the gesture carrying the weight of his family's isolation. Mom's parents live in California, and they don't talk to us very much. They didn't like Derek, but they also didn't like that Mom was raising me by myself before Derek came along. I don't know where my dad's family is. Mom says they moved away after my dad died, and they didn't want to stay in touch. Carmen felt her heart break a little more as she realized that Benjamin's support system was as damaged as everything else in his young life. Derek's systematic isolation of the Fletcher family had been thorough and effective, cutting them off from the relationships that might have provided refuge during the worst of the abuse. What about friends of your mother's? Carmen asked gently. Teachers from school? Neighbors who might be able to help? Mom doesn't really have friends anymore, Benjamin said matter-of-factly, his tone suggesting that he had long ago accepted this reality. Derek didn't like her spending time with other people. He said her friends were trying to turn her against him, so Mom stopped seeing them. And I don't think teachers are allowed to take kids home with them. Officer Walsh exchanged a meaningful look with Carmen, both women recognizing the textbook isolation that Derek had imposed on the Fletcher family. It was a classic pattern. Abusers systematically destroyed their victims' support networks, making escape seem impossible and help seem non-existent. We have emergency foster care available, Officer Walsh explained carefully, watching Benjamin's face for his reaction. There are families who are specially trained to take care of children in situations like this. They understand what you've been through, and they know how to help children feel safe. Benjamin's eyes widened with alarm at the mention of foster care. Foster care? But what if Mom wakes up and I'm not here? What if she needs me and doesn't know where I am? The thought of being separated from his mother, even temporarily, was almost more than Benjamin could bear. For years, he and Jessica had been a team of two against Derek's unpredictability, relying on each other for emotional support and protection. The idea of facing this crisis without her felt impossible. Carmen knelt down beside Benjamin again, her voice gentle but firm. Your mother is going to be in the hospital for a while, getting the medical care she needs. The most important thing you can do for her right now is to stay safe and let the adults take care of the grown-up problems. But I've been taking care of her, Benjamin protested, his voice carrying the weight of premature responsibility that had been thrust upon him. I know how to make her feel better when she's sad. I know how to stay quiet when Derek is angry. I know how to take care of things around the house. What if she forgets how to be okay without me? The words hit Carmen like a physical blow, reminding her of her own daughter Sophia's similar protestations years earlier when they had finally escaped her abusive father. Children who grew up in violent households often developed an exaggerated sense of responsibility for their parents' well-being, believing that their vigilance and good behavior could somehow prevent or minimize the violence. You've done an amazing job taking care of your mother, Carmen said, her voice thick with emotion. But you're 9 years old, Benjamin. 9-year-olds should be worried about homework and video games and whether their favorite baseball team is going to win, not about protecting their mothers from dangerous men. I don't know how to be a regular 9-year-old, Benjamin admitted, his honesty heartbreaking in its simplicity. I don't remember what it feels like to not be worried about Mom all the time. Officer Walsh had been listening to the exchange with growing concern about Benjamin's emotional state and his ability to transition to a normal childhood after years of trauma. Benjamin, would you feel more comfortable if Carmen came with you to meet the foster family? Just for tonight, until we can figure out a more permanent arrangement. Benjamin looked up at Carmen with hope blooming in his young eyes like flowers pushing through snow. Would you do that? Would you stay with me? Carmen didn't hesitate, her decision feeling as natural as breathing. Of course I will. I'll stay with you as long as you need me to. The commitment felt natural and right, as if Carmen's presence in Benjamin's life at this moment was something that had been predetermined by forces beyond their control. She had been the person Benjamin encountered when he needed help the most, and she wasn't going to abandon him now that the immediate crisis was being addressed by the appropriate authorities. Officer Walsh made a phone call to the emergency foster care coordinator, explaining the unusual situation and requesting a placement that could accommodate both Benjamin and his advocate. Within 20 minutes, they had an arrangement with the Morrison family, experienced foster parents who had dealt with domestic violence cases before and understood the complexities involved. The Morrisons have been doing emergency foster care for 12 years, Officer Walsh explained as they waited for transportation. They've helped dozens of children through situations similar to yours, Benjamin. They know how to make kids feel safe when their whole world has been turned upside down. As they stood outside the Fletcher house waiting for their ride, Benjamin found himself studying the building that had been his entire world just hours earlier. The police tape across the front door made it clear that this chapter of his life was definitively closed, but the next chapter remained unwritten and terrifying in its uncertainty. Detective Torres emerged from the house carrying evidence bags and approached the group. We've collected everything we need for tonight, he informed Officer Walsh. The scene will remain secured until we can complete a more thorough investigation tomorrow. What happens to all our stuff? Benjamin asked, the practical concerns of displacement beginning to occur to him. My clothes and my books and my toys? Everything will be safe, Detective Torres assured him. Once the investigation is complete, you and your mother will be able to get your belongings. Right now, we just need to make sure we have all the evidence we need to make sure Derek can't hurt anyone else. A car pulled up to the curb, a modest sedan driven by Eleanor Morrison, a woman in her 50s whose kind face and gentle demeanor immediately put Benjamin at ease. She approached them with the calm confidence of someone who had helped many children through similar crises, her movements deliberate and non-threatening. You must be Benjamin, Eleanor said, extending her hand for him to shake. I'm Eleanor Morrison. My husband Robert and I would be honored to have you stay with us tonight. Benjamin shook her hand solemnly, his natural politeness evident even in his exhausted state. Thank you, Mrs. Morrison. I don't want to be any trouble. You won't be any trouble at all, Eleanor assured him, her voice carrying the warmth of someone who genuinely enjoyed caring for children. We have a comfortable guest room that we keep ready for situations like this, and my husband is making hot chocolate right now. He always says that hot chocolate makes everything feel a little bit better. The mention of hot chocolate seemed to remind Benjamin that he was still a child, despite everything he had experienced that night. "I like hot chocolate," he said quietly, allowing himself to feel a small spark of anticipation for something pleasant. As they gathered Benjamin's few immediate necessities from the house and his clothes for tomorrow, his school backpack, and a stuffed elephant named Peanuts that he was embarrassed to admit he still slept with, Officer Walsh provided Carmen and Eleanor with information about the next steps in the process. "We'll need Benjamin to give a more detailed statement tomorrow," Officer Walsh explained. "And there will likely be court proceedings related to Derek's arrest and Jessica's custody of Benjamin once she recovers. The district attorney will want to prosecute Derek for aggravated assault at minimum, possibly attempted murder depending on the medical evidence." "What if Derek doesn't get arrested?" Benjamin asked, overhearing the conversation and immediately focusing on his greatest fear. "He will be arrested," Officer Walsh said with absolute certainty. "We have enough evidence from tonight to charge him with multiple felonies. The photograph you took, Benjamin, along with the physical evidence in your house and your mother's medical records, makes this a very strong case. Derek won't be able to hurt you or your mother again." Benjamin felt a mixture of relief and apprehension at the news. The rational part of his mind understood that Derek's arrest was necessary for his and his mother's safety, but the frightened child in him still worried about the consequences of defying Derek's threats about what would happen if they ever involved the authorities. As they prepared to leave Maple Street, Benjamin took one last look at the house that had been both his home and his prison for the past 2 years. The crime scene tape fluttering in the February wind made it clear that 1247 Maple Street would never again be the place where he lived in fear, waiting for the next explosion of violence. Carmen climbed into the back seat of Eleanor's car beside Benjamin, her presence a comforting constant in a night full of terrifying changes. As they drove through the quiet streets of Millbrook toward the Morrison house, Benjamin leaned against Carmen's shoulder, finally allowing exhaustion to overtake the adrenaline that had sustained him through the crisis. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of the car's heater. "Thank you for being brave enough to ask for help," Carmen replied, her arm tightening protectively around the small boy who had stumbled into her life and changed everything. "You saved your mother's life tonight, Benjamin. You should be very proud of yourself." The digital clock on Eleanor's dashboard showed 4:17 a.m. as they pulled into the driveway of a modest house with warm lights glowing in the windows. Benjamin Fletcher was about to spend his first night in foster care, but he wasn't facing it alone. Carmen Rodriguez, the night shift pharmacy clerk who had recognized a cry for help disguised as a request for medicine, would be there to help him navigate whatever came next. As they walked toward the front door of the Morrison house, Benjamin could smell something that reminded him of his mother's kitchen before Derek had arrived in their lives, the scent of baking and safety and unconditional love. For the first time in years, he was about to sleep in a house where violence was not a constant threat, where the sound of footsteps in the hallway wouldn't make him freeze with fear. It would take time for Benjamin to learn how to live without fear, time for his mother to heal from her injuries, time for their family to rebuild itself in safety. But the hardest part, asking for help when help seemed impossible to find, was over. Benjamin Fletcher had walked 12 blocks through a February night to buy medicine for his mother's bruises and had ended up saving both their lives. Sometimes the most extraordinary courage comes from the most ordinary love, and sometimes the smallest acts of bravery change everything. The Morrison house stood like a beacon of warmth against the February night, its windows glowing with the kind of light that promised safety and comfort. As Eleanor Morrison led Benjamin and Carmen up the front walk, the contrast between this peaceful suburban home and the chaos they had just left behind felt almost surreal. The porch light cast a welcoming circle of illumination, and Benjamin could see curtains in the windows that suggested a life lived without the constant need to hide from prying eyes. Robert Morrison met them at the front door, a gentle giant of a man whose silver hair and kind eyes immediately reminded Benjamin of the grandfather he had never known. He wore a thick sweater and comfortable slippers, and the smile that creased his weathered face was genuine and unforced. "Welcome to our home, Benjamin," Robert said, his voice carrying the warmth of someone who had spent years making frightened children feel safe. "I'm Robert, but you can call me whatever feels comfortable to you." Benjamin looked up at this man who towered over him but somehow didn't feel threatening at all. "Thank you, Mr. Morrison. I'm sorry for waking you up so late." "You didn't wake us up," Eleanor assured him as they stepped into the warm foyer. "We were already awake, getting things ready for you. This is what we do, Benjamin. We help children who need a safe place to stay." The interior of the Morrison house was a study in comfortable living. The furniture was worn but well-maintained, the kind of pieces that had been chosen for durability and comfort rather than style. Family photographs lined the mantelpiece above a fireplace where embers still glowed from an earlier fire. The house smelled of hot chocolate and cinnamon, scents that immediately reminded Benjamin of better times with his mother. "I promised hot chocolate," Robert said, gesturing toward the kitchen where steam was rising from mugs arranged on a wooden tray. "I find that warm drinks help make difficult nights a little easier to bear." As they settled into the living room, Benjamin found himself perched on the edge of a comfortable couch, still wearing his winter coat despite the warmth of the house. Carmen sat beside him, her presence a comforting anchor in this strange new environment. Eleanor and Robert took chairs across from them, positioning themselves close enough to offer comfort but far enough away to avoid making Benjamin feel crowded. "This is a beautiful home," Carmen said, accepting a mug of hot chocolate and wrapping her hands around its warmth. "How long have you been doing foster care?" 12 years this spring," Eleanor replied, settling back in her chair with her own mug. "We started after our own children moved out and we realized we had room in our home and our hearts for kids who needed a safe place to land." Benjamin sipped his hot chocolate carefully, the rich sweetness coating his throat and providing the first genuine comfort he had felt since finding his mother on the kitchen floor. "How many kids have stayed here?" 63, Robert answered without hesitation. "We remember every single one of them. Some stayed for just a night or two, others for several months. Each child teaches us something new about courage and resilience." The number seemed impossibly large to Benjamin. 63 kids who didn't have anywhere safe to live? 63 kids who found themselves in situations that weren't their fault, Eleanor corrected gently. "Just like you, Benjamin. Sometimes bad things happen to good people, and when they do, it's important that there are adults ready to help." Benjamin absorbed this information, adding it to his growing understanding of how the world worked outside the bubble of fear that Derek had created around his family. "Do the kids who stay here ever get to go back to their families?" "Some do," Robert said honestly, "when it's safe for them to do so. Others find new families through adoption. And some, like teenagers who are almost grown up, we help them learn to live independently. Every situation is different." "What about kids whose moms are in the hospital?" Benjamin asked, his voice small and worried. Eleanor and Robert exchanged a glance that spoke of years of experience with traumatized children. "Those kids stay with us until their moms get better," Eleanor said. "And we make sure they get to visit their moms in the hospital and talk to them on the phone every day." The promise of daily contact with his mother lifted a weight from Benjamin's chest that he hadn't realized he was carrying. "Really? I can talk to Mom every day?" "Absolutely," Robert confirmed. "In fact, we can probably call the hospital first thing in the morning to check on how she's doing. The doctors will want to give her some time to rest tonight, but tomorrow they should be able to tell us more about her condition." Carmen had been watching this gentle interrogation with growing admiration for the Morrisons' skill in making Benjamin feel welcome while addressing his most pressing concerns. "Benjamin, why don't you tell Robert and Eleanor a little bit about yourself? What grade are you in? What do you like to do?" Benjamin considered the question, realizing that he hadn't thought about normal childhood activities in a very long time. "I'm in 4th grade at Millbrook Elementary. I like to read, especially adventure stories. And I'm good at math, though I missed a lot of school this year when Mom was sick." Eleanor made a mental note about the missed school time, recognizing it as another indicator of the disruption that domestic violence had caused in Benjamin's life. "What's your favorite book?" "The Hardy Boys Mysteries," Benjamin said, his face lighting up slightly as he thought about something that brought him joy. "I like how they solve problems and help people who are in trouble." "We have some Hardy Boys books here," Robert said. "Previous guests left them behind for other kids to enjoy. Would you like to see our library?" The offer of books was the first thing that had made Benjamin smile since entering the pharmacy hours earlier. Yes, please. Robert led Benjamin and Carmen down a hallway lined with photographs of children who had stayed in the Morrison house over the years. Some photos showed kids on their first night, looking scared and uncertain. Others captured moments of joy, birthday parties, Christmas mornings, graduation ceremonies. Benjamin studied the faces, looking for clues about what his own experience might be like. This is our library, Robert said, opening a door to reveal a room lined with bookshelves from floor to ceiling. Every child who stays with us gets to pick out books to keep when they leave. It's our way of making sure they always have something to remember us by. Benjamin's eyes widened as he took in the vast collection. There were picture books for younger children, chapter books for kids his age, and even adult novels. The Hardy Boys series occupied an entire shelf, along with Nancy Drew mysteries and Encyclopedia Brown adventures. You can pick out some books to take to your room, Eleanor said. Reading can be a good way to quiet your mind when you're trying to fall asleep in a new place. As Benjamin selected several books, Carmen found herself in conversation with Eleanor about the practical aspects of his stay. What about school tomorrow? Should he go? Or would it be better for him to stay home? That depends on what Benjamin feels comfortable with, Eleanor replied. Some children find that maintaining their normal routine helps them feel more stable. Others need a day or two to process what's happened before they're ready to face their classmates. Benjamin looked up from the books he was examining. What would I tell the other kids about why I'm not living at home anymore? It was a question that demonstrated his growing awareness of how dramatically his life had changed in just a few hours. Eleanor knelt down beside him, her voice gentle but honest. You don't have to tell them anything you're not comfortable sharing, she said. If anyone asks, you can simply say that your mom is in the hospital and you're staying with friends of the family. That's completely true, and it's all the information that anyone needs. The simplicity of the explanation appealed to Benjamin. He had grown so accustomed to managing complex lies and half-truths about his home life that the idea of a straightforward, honest answer felt revolutionary. I think I'd like to go to school tomorrow, Benjamin decided. It might feel good to do something normal. Carmen felt a surge of pride at Benjamin's resilience. Despite everything he had endured, he was already thinking about how to rebuild his routine and reclaim some sense of normalcy. They returned to the living room, where Eleanor showed Benjamin to the guest room that would be his for the duration of his stay. The room was clearly designed with children in mind, twin bed with a cheerful quilt, desk for homework, bulletin board for displaying artwork or photographs. The walls were painted a soothing blue, and blackout curtains ensured that the room would be dark and quiet for sleeping. This room has been home to a lot of brave kids, Eleanor said as Benjamin set his selected books on the nightstand. I think it has some special magic that helps children feel safe and get good rest. Benjamin sat on the edge of the bed, testing its softness. After years of sleeping on a mattress that Derek had deemed good enough for him, the comfortable bed felt luxurious. Mrs. Morrison, Benjamin said quietly, what happens if Derek finds out where I am? Eleanor sat beside him on the bed, her voice firm and reassuring. Derek doesn't know where you are, and the police aren't going to tell him. This address is confidential, which means it's a secret that only people who are trying to help you will know. But what if he drives around looking for me? Derek is going to have much bigger problems to worry about than finding you, Robert said from the doorway. When the police arrest him, and they will arrest him, he's going to be much too busy with lawyers and court dates to spend time driving around Millbrook. Carmen had been quiet during this exchange, but now she spoke up. Benjamin, I know it's hard to believe that Derek's threats don't have power anymore, but they don't. The police saw your house tonight. They saw the evidence of what Derek did to your mother. Derek's time of being in control is over. Benjamin nodded, though Carmen could see that it would take time for him to truly believe that the fear that had governed his life for 2 years was no longer necessary. I should probably call my daughter, Carmen said, glancing at the clock on the nightstand. She'll be wondering where I am when she wakes up for school. Of course, Eleanor said. You can use the phone in the kitchen for privacy. As Carmen stepped out to make her call, Benjamin found himself alone with the Morrisons for the first time. The silence felt different from the tense quiet that filled his house whenever Derek was angry. This was a peaceful silence, the kind that existed in homes where people felt safe to relax. "Benjamin," Eleanor said gently, "is there anything you need tonight? Extra blankets? A nightlight? Anything that would help you feel more comfortable?" Benjamin considered the question seriously. "I usually sleep with Peanuts," he said, referring to his stuffed elephant. "But I'm probably too old for stuffed animals." "Nonsense," Robert said immediately. "I'm 68 years old, and I still sleep with the teddy bear my grandmother gave me when I was 5. Comfort objects aren't about age. They're about having something familiar to hold on to when everything else feels uncertain." The permission to maintain this childhood comfort without judgment was a gift Benjamin hadn't expected. He retrieved Peanuts from his backpack, the worn gray elephant that had been his constant companion through countless nights of listening to Derek's rages. "Peanuts has very wise eyes," Eleanor observed, examining the stuffed animal with appropriate seriousness. "I can tell he's been a good friend to you." "He's helped me feel brave when I was scared," Benjamin admitted. "Mom says that sometimes we all need something to hold on to that reminds us we're not alone." The mention of his mother brought a shadow of worry across Benjamin's face. Eleanor noticed immediately and sat back down beside him. "Your mother is getting the best medical care possible right now," she said. "The doctors at Millbrook General Hospital are excellent, and they specialize in helping people who have been badly hurt." "Will she remember me when she wakes up?" Benjamin asked, voicing a fear he hadn't even realized he was harboring. "Of course she'll remember you," Robert assured him. "Head injuries can sometimes cause temporary confusion, but mothers never forget their children. You're the most important thing in her world, Benjamin." Carmen returned from the kitchen, her expression slightly strained. "I explained everything to Sophia," she reported. "She's worried about you, Benjamin, but she understands why I need to be here tonight." "How old is Sophia?" Benjamin asked, curious about Carmen's daughter. 16, Carmen replied. "She was about your age when we left her father and had to start over. She remembers what it feels like to be scared and unsure about the future." The parallel between his situation and Carmen's past was not lost on Benjamin. "Did Sophia's dad hurt you the way Derek hurt my mom?" Carmen nodded, her honesty unflinching. "Yes, he did. For several years, we lived the same way you and your mother have been living, walking on eggshells, trying not to make him angry, hoping that somehow things would get better on their own." "What made you finally leave?" "One night, Sophia tried to protect me during a particularly bad fight," Carmen said, her voice thick with emotion at the memory. "She was 9 years old, just like you, and she threw herself between her father and me. That's when I realized that my decision to stay wasn't just hurting me. It was teaching my daughter that violence was normal, that it was something she might have to accept in her own life someday." Benjamin absorbed this story, understanding instinctively the parallel between Sophia's brave intervention and his own walk to the pharmacy. "Was Sophia scared when you left?" "Terrified," Carmen admitted. "We both were, but we were also relieved." And as time went on, the relief grew stronger while the fear got smaller. Eleanor had been listening to this conversation with the trained ear of someone who had helped many families transition from abusive situations to safety. "Benjamin, it's normal to have mixed feelings about what's happening. You can be glad that your mother is getting help and scared about the changes at the same time. All of those feelings are okay." Benjamin nodded, though he was still processing the complexity of his emotions. "I keep thinking about Derek coming home and finding the police cars. He's going to be so angry." "Derek's anger is Derek's problem now," Robert said firmly. "His anger is no longer something you or your mother have to manage or worry about. That's a job for the police and the courts." The idea that Derek's emotions were no longer Benjamin's responsibility was radical and liberating. For 2 years, he had lived his life trying to anticipate and prevent Derek's anger, believing that if he could just be good enough, quiet enough, invisible enough, he could protect his mother from the worst of Derek's violence. "I think it's time for you to try to get some rest," Eleanor said gently. Tomorrow is going to be a big day with lots of new information about your mother's condition and what happens next. Benjamin looked around the peaceful room that would be his temporary home, so different from his bedroom on Maple Street, where he had learned to sleep through the sounds of breaking glass and raised voices. "Mrs. Morrison," he said quietly, "thank you for letting me stay here. I promise I'll be good and won't cause any trouble." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears at the automatic promise that revealed so much about Benjamin's learned behavior. "Oh, sweetheart, you don't have to earn your place here by being good. You have a place here because you need one, and that's enough." The concept of unconditional acceptance was foreign to Benjamin, who had spent years trying to earn Derek's approval and minimize his disapproval. "But what if I have nightmares or get scared in the middle of the night?" "Then you come find us," Robert said simply. "Our bedroom is right across the hall, and we're very light sleepers. If you need anything at all, you just call out and we'll be here." Carmen stood up, preparing to settle into the guest chair that Eleanor had arranged for her in Benjamin's room. "I'll be right here too," she reminded him. "You won't be alone." As Benjamin changed into the pajamas that Eleanor had provided, soft cotton that still smelled of fabric softener and sunshine, he found himself marveling at the simple luxury of feeling safe. The pajamas fit properly, unlike the hand-me-downs that Derek had insisted were good enough for him. The toothbrush in the bathroom was new and still in its package, chosen specifically for him. "Benjamin," Carmen said as he settled into bed with Peanuts tucked securely under his arm, "before you go to sleep, I want you to know something important. What you did tonight, walking to the pharmacy, asking for help, showing me that photograph, that was the bravest thing I've ever seen anyone do." Benjamin looked up at her from his pillow, his young face serious. "It didn't feel brave. It felt scary." "That's what makes it brave," Carmen explained. "Courage isn't about not being scared. Courage is about doing the right thing even when you're terrified." Eleanor dimmed the lights and adjusted the curtains, creating the perfect environment for sleep. "Sweet dreams, Benjamin. Tomorrow we'll call the hospital first thing and check on your mother." As the adults settled into quiet conversation in the hallway, Benjamin lay in the comfortable bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of a peaceful house. There was no television blaring to mask arguments, no heavy footsteps pacing angrily across creaky floors. The silence was filled with safety rather than tension. For the first time in years, Benjamin Fletcher fell asleep without wondering if he would wake up to the sound of his mother crying. He slept deeply and dreamlessly, his small body finally able to rest completely now that the burden of constant vigilance had been lifted from his 9-year-old shoulders. Outside, the February wind continued to howl through the streets of Millbrook, but inside the Morrison house, a little boy who had walked 12 blocks through the darkness to save his mother's life was learning what it felt like to sleep in peace. Down the hall, Carmen Rodriguez sat in the quiet kitchen with Eleanor and Robert Morrison, drinking coffee and processing the events of the night. In a few hours, they would begin the complex process of helping Benjamin rebuild his life in safety. But for now, the most important thing had been accomplished. A child who had been living in fear was sleeping soundly, protected by adults who understood the value of childhood and the importance of healing. The worst night of Benjamin Fletcher's life had become the first night of his recovery, and somewhere in the intensive care unit of Millbrook General Hospital, his mother Jessica was beginning her own journey back to the land of the living, sustained by the knowledge that her son's courage had saved them both. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Millbrook General Hospital's rehabilitation wing, casting warm geometric patterns across the polished linoleum floors. Jessica Fletcher sat in a wheelchair by the window of her room, her face turned toward the light like a flower seeking nourishment. The worst of her physical injuries had healed, the swelling had gone down. The bruises had faded from purple to yellow to nothing, and the stitches had been removed from the gash on her forehead. But the deeper healing, the mending of a spirit that had been systematically broken over 2 years, was still a work in progress. "Mom, look what I made in art class," Benjamin said as he burst through the doorway, his face bright with the kind of excitement that had been absent from his life for so long. In his hands, he carried a ceramic bowl painted in cheerful blues and greens, slightly lopsided but clearly made with love and pride. Jessica's face lit up as she examined her son's creation, turning it carefully in her hands. "Benjamin, this is beautiful. You're becoming quite the artist." "Mrs. Chun says I have a natural eye for color," Benjamin said, settling into the chair beside his mother's wheelchair. "She thinks I should take more art classes next year." The easy confidence in Benjamin's voice was a testament to the remarkable transformation that had taken place over the past 6 weeks. Living with the Morrison family had given him space to rediscover the child he had been before fear became his primary emotion. He attended school regularly now, his grades improving steadily as his mind was freed from the constant worry about his mother's safety. He had made friends, something that had been impossible when Derek's demands for secrecy kept the Fletcher family isolated from normal social connections. "Tell me about your week," Jessica said, her voice still carrying traces of the exhaustion that came with trauma recovery, but growing stronger each day. "What else happened at school?" Benjamin launched into an animated account of his 4th-grade adventures, a science project about volcanoes, a spelling bee where he had placed 3rd, a playground dispute that he had helped resolve through negotiation rather than violence. Each story was a small miracle to Jessica, evidence that her son was learning to be a normal child in a world where problems had solutions and conflicts could be resolved without fear. Carmen Rodriguez appeared in the doorway, carrying a bouquet of daffodils and wearing the comfortable smile that had become familiar to both Fletchers over the past weeks. Her role in their lives had evolved naturally from that first night's crisis intervention to something that felt like family. The aunt they had never had, the friend who understood their journey because she had walked a similar path. "How are my favorite people today?" Carmen asked, settling the flowers in a vase by the window. "Carmen brought flowers," Benjamin announced unnecessarily, his enthusiasm for small pleasures still touching in its intensity. "I can see that," Jessica laughed, and the sound was music to both Carmen's and Benjamin's ears. Jessica's laughter had been one of the casualties of her relationship with Derek, buried so deeply under fear and depression that its return felt like a resurrection. "The doctors say I can be discharged next week," Jessica told Carmen, her voice carrying a mixture of excitement and apprehension. "They think I'm ready to start the next phase of recovery." Carmen nodded, understanding the complex emotions that came with leaving the safety of the hospital. "How are you feeling about that?" Jessica was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. "Scared," she admitted. "Excited, grateful, overwhelmed, all at the same time." "That sounds about right," Carmen said gently. "When Sophia and I left her father, I felt like I was stepping off a cliff into thin air. But the ground was there to catch us. It just took faith to take that first step." The parallel between Carmen's experience and their own situation had become a source of comfort for Jessica throughout her recovery. Carmen's presence proved that it was possible to survive domestic violence, to rebuild a life, to raise a child who could thrive despite the trauma of their early years. "Speaking of Sophia," Carmen continued, "she wanted me to give you this." She handed Jessica a handwritten letter, carefully folded and sealed with a heart sticker. Jessica opened the letter and read silently, her eyes filling with tears that were equal parts gratitude and amazement. Sophia had written about her own memories of recovery, her fears and hopes, and her absolute certainty that Jessica and Benjamin would not only survive but flourish in their new life. "She's remarkable," Jessica said, wiping her eyes. "Both of you are. I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done for us." "You don't need to thank us," Carmen replied. "You just need to keep moving forward. Keep healing. Keep building the life you and Benjamin deserve." Benjamin had been listening to this exchange with the serious attention he brought to all adult conversations, his premature maturity still evident despite the significant strides he had made toward reclaiming his childhood. "Mom, are you still scared about Derek?" It was a question that hung unspoken in the air during most of their visits, and Jessica appreciated her son's directness in finally voicing it. "Sometimes," she answered honestly, "but not the way I used to be. Derek is in jail, Benjamin. He's going to be there for a very long time." The trial had concluded the week before, resulting in Derek's conviction on multiple charges including aggravated assault, domestic violence, and child endangerment. The photograph that Benjamin had taken with his phone had been crucial evidence. providing undeniable proof of the severity of Derek's violence. Combined with the physical evidence from the house and Jessica's medical records, the case had been overwhelming in its clarity. 15 years, Benjamin said, reciting the sentence that had been explained to him in age-appropriate terms. That's longer than I've been alive. Much longer, Jessica confirmed. And when he gets out, there will be a restraining order that means he's not allowed to come anywhere near us. Ever. The legal protections were important, but even more significant was the psychological shift that had occurred in both Jessica and Benjamin. The fear that had once governed their every decision was being gradually replaced by a growing sense of agency and self-determination. They were learning to make choices based on what they wanted rather than what they feared. The Morrisons asked if I want to keep staying with them even after you get out of the hospital, Benjamin said, his voice careful and tentative. Just until you're completely better and we figure out where we want to live. Jessica felt a momentary pang at the suggestion that her son might be better off away from her, but she pushed the feeling aside. Benjamin's well-being had to be the priority, even if it meant acknowledging that she still had healing to do before she could provide him with the stability he needed. What do you think about that idea? Jessica asked, working to keep her voice neutral. I think it makes sense, Benjamin said, his response demonstrating the thoughtfulness that trauma had forced him to develop. I like living with them and you need time to get completely healthy. Plus, I can visit you every day, and when you're ready, we can find a new place to live together. The maturity of his reasoning was both impressive and heartbreaking. Jessica had to remind herself that while Benjamin's wisdom beyond his years had helped him survive their ordeal, part of his recovery would involve learning to think like a child again rather than a caretaker. I think that sounds like a very good plan, Jessica agreed. The Morrisons love having you there, and I love knowing that you're safe and happy while I finish getting better. Dr. Patricia Wells appeared in the doorway, her presence immediately bringing a sense of professional competence to the room. Dr. Wells had been Jessica's primary physician throughout her stay, guiding not only her physical recovery but also coordinating her psychological care. Good morning, everyone, Doctor, Wells said, consulting the tablet she carried. Jessica, I have some updates about your discharge planning that I'd like to discuss. Benjamin automatically started to leave the room, his learned behavior from living with Derek still occasionally surfacing. Dr. Wells noticed immediately and gently called him back. Benjamin, you're welcome to stay, she said. This conversation affects your family, and you're an important part of this family. The inclusion felt revolutionary to Benjamin, who had spent 2 years being told that adult conversations were none of his business. He settled back into his chair, eager to participate in planning his family's future. Jessica, your physical recovery has exceeded our expectations, Dr. Wells began. The neurological tests show no lasting damage from your concussion, and your other injuries have healed completely. From a medical standpoint, you're ready for discharge. And from a psychological standpoint? Jessica asked, knowing that her emotional healing was equally important. Dr. Martinez feels that you've made excellent progress in your trauma therapy sessions, Dr. Wells replied. You've developed healthy coping strategies, and you've demonstrated a clear understanding of the warning signs of abusive relationships. She's confident that you're ready to continue your recovery as an outpatient. The validation from the mental health professional was enormously important to Jessica. One of Derek's most effective tactics had been convincing her that she was weak, unstable, and incapable of making good decisions. Learning to trust her own judgment again had been one of the most challenging aspects of her recovery. What about work? Benjamin asked, practical concerns occurring to him as they often did. Will Mom be able to go back to the library? The library has been incredibly supportive, Jessica said, her voice warm with gratitude. They've held my position for me, and they're willing to let me start back part-time whenever I'm ready. Carmen smiled at this news. That's wonderful. Having meaningful work will be good for your recovery. I've missed the library, Jessica admitted. I've missed feeling useful, feeling like I have something valuable to contribute to the world. Derek had systematically undermined Jessica's sense of competence and worth, convincing her that her job was unimportant and that she was lucky to have him in her life. Reclaiming her professional identity was an important step in rebuilding her self-esteem. Speaking of the future, Dr. Wells said, we need to discuss housing arrangements. Benjamin mentioned that he's staying with the Morrison family, but what are your plans, Jessica? Jessica had been giving this question considerable thought throughout her hospitalization. I've been approved for a transitional housing program for domestic violence survivors, she said. It's a small apartment complex where families can live safely while they rebuild their lives. The rent is subsidized, and there are support services available. Benjamin perked up at this information. Is it near the Morrisons' house? Could I still go to the same school? It's about 10 minutes away, Jessica confirmed. You could definitely stay at Millbrook Elementary if you want to. The continuity of Benjamin's school experience was important for his stability. He had worked hard to catch up academically after the chaos of the past 2 years, and maintaining his friendships and educational progress was crucial for his continued healing. The transitional housing program sounds perfect, Carmen said. How long can you stay there? Up to 2 years, Jessica replied. Long enough for me to save money for a permanent place and to make sure Benjamin and I are both emotionally ready for complete independence. The conversation was interrupted by a soft knock on the door. Officer Janet Walsh appeared, her presence no longer carrying the urgency of that first night, but rather the warmth of someone who had become genuinely invested in the Fletcher family's welfare. I hope I'm not interrupting, Officer Walsh said. I wanted to stop by and give you an update about Derek's case. Benjamin tensed slightly at the mention of Derek's name, but the fear that once would have consumed him was now manageable, contained by the knowledge that Derek could no longer hurt them. The prison officials have confirmed that Derek has been transferred to the state correctional facility, Officer Walsh reported. He's been classified as a high-risk offender, which means he's subject to additional restrictions on his communications and movements. What does that mean for us? Jessica asked. It means that Derek has no way of finding out where you're living or what you're doing, Officer Walsh explained. The transitional housing program you're entering has strict confidentiality protocols. Derek won't even know what city you're in. The security measures provided an additional layer of protection that allowed Jessica to feel truly safe for the first time in years. Derek's power over their lives had been completely severed, not just by his imprisonment but by the systems designed to protect domestic violence survivors. Officer Walsh, Benjamin said, his voice carrying a formality that showed his respect for law enforcement. Thank you for catching Derek and making sure he can't hurt anyone else. Thank you for being brave enough to get help when your mother needed it most, Officer Walsh replied. You saved her life, Ben. That's something you should always be proud of. The reminder of his role in their rescue still felt surreal to Benjamin. In his mind, he had simply tried to buy medicine for his mother's headache. The adult understanding that his actions had prevented Derek from killing Jessica was still too large for his 9-year-old comprehension to fully grasp. As the afternoon wore on, the hospital room filled with a sense of anticipation and hope that had been absent from the Fletcher family's life for too long. Jessica's discharge was scheduled for the following Tuesday, marking the official end of one chapter and the beginning of another. I have something for you, Carmen said, reaching into her purse and withdrawing a small wrapped package. It's an early celebration of your new beginning. Jessica unwrapped the gift carefully, revealing a small ceramic photo frame. Inside was a picture that Carmen had taken the week before, Jessica and Benjamin sitting together in the hospital garden, both of them laughing at something Benjamin had said. It was the first photograph of them together that showed joy instead of fear. This is beautiful, Jessica said, her voice thick with emotion. We look happy. You are happy, Carmen observed. And you deserve to be happy. Both of you. Benjamin studied the photograph, marveling at how different they both looked compared to 6 weeks earlier. His mother's face had lost the haunted quality that had become habitual during Derek's reign of terror. His own expression showed the carefree quality that should have been his birthright as a child. Carmen, Benjamin said suddenly, when we move to our new apartment, will you still come visit us? The question revealed Benjamin's lingering insecurity about abandonment, his fear that the people who had helped them might disappear once the crisis was officially resolved. Wild horses couldn't keep me away, Carmen assured him. You two are stuck with me now. Sophia and I want to be part of your lives for as long as you'll have us. Forever, Benjamin said immediately. We want you for forever. The sentiment was echoed in Jessica's grateful smile. Carmen had become more than a friend or even a surrogate family member. She was living proof that survival was possible, that healing could happen, that love existed outside the twisted dynamics of abusive relationships. Dr. Wells began the process of finalizing Jessica's discharge paperwork, outlining the follow-up appointments and support services that would continue her care. The transition from inpatient to outpatient status felt momentous, a concrete step toward reclaiming her independence. I want you both to know, Dr. Wells said as she prepared to leave, that what you've accomplished over these past 6 weeks is remarkable. Jessica, your commitment to your recovery has been inspiring. And Benjamin, your resilience and courage are extraordinary. The praise felt foreign to both Fletchers, who had grown accustomed to criticism and blame under Derek's influence. Learning to accept compliments and recognition was part of their healing process. As evening approached and visiting hours drew to a close, the hospital room gradually emptied. Carmen left to pick up Sophia from her part-time job. Officer Walsh departed for her evening shift. Dr. Wells moved on to other patients. Eventually, only Jessica and Benjamin remained, sitting together in the gathering dusk. Mom, Benjamin said quietly, are you scared about leaving the hospital? Jessica considered the question honestly. A little, she admitted. This place has felt safe, and I've gotten used to having doctors and nurses nearby if I need help. But I'm more excited than scared. Me too, Benjamin said. I'm excited about us living in the same place again, even if it's not right away. The temporary separation had been difficult for both of them, but it had also allowed them each to heal in their own way. Benjamin had learned to trust other adults and to experience childhood without the burden of protecting his mother. Jessica had focused on her recovery without worrying about the impact on her son. Benjamin, I want you to know something important, Jessica said, taking her son's hands in hers. What happened to us with Derek was never your fault. Nothing you did or didn't do caused his behavior. And everything you did to help us escape was brave and smart and exactly right. Benjamin nodded, though Jessica could see that he was still processing the complex emotions surrounding their ordeal. I know, he said. Dr. Martinez explained that to me. But sometimes I still feel bad that I couldn't protect you better. You protected me perfectly, Jessica said firmly. You saved my life, Benjamin. But more than that, you saved both of our lives. Because if we had stayed with Derek, eventually he would have killed me, and then what would have happened to you? The stark reality of their situation was something they had discussed in therapy, but it still carried emotional weight. Benjamin's midnight walk to the pharmacy had been the pivot point that transformed them from victims to survivors. The Morrisons say that sometimes bad things happen so that good things can happen later, Benjamin said. Do you think that's true? Jessica smiled at the wisdom of her foster family. I think that sometimes we find the strength to create good things out of bad experiences. You and I are going to have a wonderful life, Benjamin. A life where we're safe and happy and free to be ourselves. The promise hung in the air between them, backed by 6 weeks of evidence that healing was possible and hope was justified. Outside the hospital window, the lights of Millbrook twinkled in the darkness. A city that had once felt hostile and dangerous, but now represented possibility and new beginnings. Tuesday morning arrived with the kind of crisp clarity that made everything seem possible. Jessica Fletcher signed her discharge papers with hands that no longer trembled, accepted the prescriptions for her follow-up care, and walked out of Millbrook General Hospital on her own 2 feet. Benjamin was waiting for her in the lobby with the Morrisons and Carmen, his face bright with excitement at this milestone in their recovery. Ready to start our new adventure? Jessica asked her son, taking his hand as they walked toward the hospital exit. Ready, Benjamin confirmed, his voice strong and certain. As they stepped out into the morning sunshine, Jessica felt a sensation she had almost forgotten, the feeling of walking toward something wonderful instead of running away from something terrible. The future stretched out before them like an unwritten book, full of pages waiting to be filled with stories of joy, growth, and the kind of love that builds rather than destroys. 6 weeks earlier, Benjamin Fletcher had walked 12 blocks through a February night to buy medicine for his mother's bruises. That journey had led them both from darkness into light, from fear into safety, from despair into hope. Sometimes the longest journeys begin with a single step taken by a child who refuses to give up on love. Sometimes the most profound healing starts with one person's willingness to see pain disguised as a simple request for help. Sometimes salvation comes in the form of a night shift pharmacy clerk who understands that breaking the cycle of violence requires courage from both those who ask for help and those who choose to provide it. The story of the Fletcher family was far from over, but the chapters of fear and violence had finally come to an end. What remained was the infinite possibility of a future built on love, safety, and the knowledge that they would never again have to face the darkness alone. In the distance, the bells of Millbrook's old church chimed the hour, marking not just the passage of time but the beginning of a new chapter in two lives that had been forever changed by one child's midnight journey from despair to hope. The pharmacy where it all began stood ready for the next person who might need help, and Carmen Rodriguez would be there when they did, understanding better than ever that sometimes the most important prescriptions are the ones that heal the heart.